Hello everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It is time for a new book review today, and today I have the pleasure of sharing my thoughts, my life lessons out of this book called My Husband by debut author Maud Ventura. This book is translated from French and the translator is Emma Ramadan. The reason I read this book was one of the ladies at our book club mentioned this book and I needed to read something that was a little bit more light-hearted after some heavy reads that I have been reading. And sometimes, I don't know if you find the same, that if you've been reading some very heavy books, it's nice to pick up a book that is a lot more light-hearted, a lot easier to immerse yourself into, and something that is more like a teaser to get you ready for your next heavy read. It's something that doesn't take too much brain power, but something that is enjoyable enough that helps you pick up the book from your bedside drawer and just read it without any interruptions, and you immediately immerse yourself into the story. Now, Maud Ventura is a French author, and I don't know if you know, but I have been learning the French language for the last few years. It was one of my COVID projects where during COVID lockdown I thought, right, I'm going to learn a language and I'm going to learn it to fluency. And I've done that. I'm finding though, when I read French novels, I'm still struggling. And I'm struggling in the sense that French novels have idioms, they have context, nuances, they have sayings, and they somehow kind of go over my head, especially as a language learner. And that's not to say that you shouldn't read novels of the language that you're learning. I say by all means. For me, the way I have approached it is, if I do read French, I will read it at a level a little bit less than the level I'm at, simply because I miss all that context that when you read in English, you can understand the gist, you can understand the meaning and the the context of what you're reading. You somehow miss all that when you're learning a second language. Part of me thinks that I should have read this in the French language, but another part of me says, well, I'm glad that I didn't read it, because I would have missed a whole heap of stuff that was very interesting around the psyche of this lady here. Many, many years ago, I read this article in the Australian Women's Weekly that really struck, I'm not going to say struck a chord with me, but I thought it was really weird. And it was weird in the sense that this article was about this woman who really, really loved her husband more than she loved her children. And at the time I wasn't married, I didn't even have a boyfriend, but it struck me really strange that someone actually has said something like that, because usually we always hear of a mother's love of children, and we always hear about if there was any danger to children, a mother would put the lives of her children above all else, even above her husband. I started to wonder even back then, you know, that's really bizarre. And since then, I have not read any books about that particular theme, about someone, a woman, loving her husband so much, even at the expense of her children. It is just not a theme that is written about. And so that's why this one really piqued my curiosity. Even though one of the ladies at our book club that I started mentioned this book, it is now a book in our book club that is just doing the rounds. It's not a book that we're talking about, but it is a book that everyone is borrowing from each other to read, because it is such a different theme. So the theme is, as I mentioned, about this woman who is happily married for 15 years and she's got 2 wonderful children. But her thing is that she is obsessed. She's obsessed by her husband. She still has those very first feelings of love and adoration that people usually have very early on in their courtship days. She still has that. And she would put the love of her husband above all else, even her children, just to spend more time with him. And sometimes it's that kind of feeling, that obsession, that makes us keep turning the page. Also makes you realize that this woman is constantly thinking about her husband, is constantly thinking about ways to make more time with him, even at the expense of kind of putting her kids to bed and kind of threatening her kids to stay in bed just so she can have a bottle of wine or whatever with her husband. But what she does and how she does it is really, really obsessive, and it's kind of weird and kind of odd and maybe even scary at times. She takes notes of things that he has said, things that has not sat well with her, and then she tests him out over the course of the week. And she does things that she wants to see a reaction, even though he doesn't understand what he's doing. Or does he? I don't know. I'm not going to spoil anything here in this book, but there is a big twist in the end. So ultimately, for me though, I mean, this is about life lessons. And you might say, what's a life lesson about this woman? Well, the very first lesson I would say is it gives me an indication about the obsessive quality of people who are highly, highly sensitive to others around them. Now, this person in here, she is a synesthete. And I looked into this synesthesia, and it is someone who actually feels colours, and she's swayed and influenced by colours. Every day of the week is signified by a colour for her. And I was really fascinated to learn how synesthetes actually have this world of colour around them and let their whole lives be determined by colours. She could go into a museum or an art gallery and experience great movement or great emotion with beautiful colours one day, but then go back again the next day and everything feels flat. And this really fascinated me with this concept of synesthesia. So I looked on YouTube, and it seems that there are other people out there who have this concept of everything being a colour, or numbers being as colours, or in this lady's case, clothes and days all had a colour associated with them. What it showed to me though was, for someone who is so obsessed and so sensitive to colour, she feels everything. She needs to take notes about her husband and then throw little tests at him all the time to see how he reacts. So at times I thought to myself, does she really, really love him? Is this an obsessive love? But then there were other times when I thought to myself, oh, he's actually the one pulling the strings. Maybe he's the one who's gaslighting her, because there were times where what she would say would be similar to, say, a woman who is in a domestic violence situation would say. So you didn't know how to take it, whether she was really obsessed or whether she was under the thumb of her husband. We don't know. In that sense, that life lesson for me was all about understanding synesthesia. Now, I read this as a person who is married for about the same amount of years that this woman is, and I don't have children. So that kind of feeling of putting above all else the love of your husband over your children is something that I don't understand, and I will never understand, because I won't have children. But at the same time, I think to myself, well, the only person in my life is my husband, and I devote all my love to him as well. And in some sense, I actually really connected with this woman because I understand it, but I understood it from the point of view of not having children. And I do wonder that if I did have children, how would that love of the husband over many, many years of marriage, knowing especially that over years of marriage, love morphs to something else more like respect, or, do you get my drift? So I found that reading this as someone who doesn't have children, at times I thought, yeah, she's, her behaviour is actually quite normal, but maybe for people with children, maybe it's not. So I'd be really interested to find out, if you've read this book, how you kind of reacted to it, because I think we would all have different reactions to this. The third element that I thought was really fascinating, because it's something that we don't always think about, is this perception of the French culture, of French people having mistresses or allowing to have mistresses. It's kind of like a done thing. And to other countries, that might seem odd in some way, even though it might happen. And, I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying that it seems like in the French culture, having a mistress, having a lover on the side is actually quite normal. And it was really interesting to read how she thought about it. And she actually discounted mistresses and lovers, because the way she explained it was, as long as they don't meet the family, as long as the other person doesn't devote their life by marrying them or having children with them, somehow then it's okay. So having that kind of viewpoint, that perspective of, I guess, different cultures and how they view taking on lovers and taking on mistresses as something that you do on the side, as long as you never ever marry them, have children with them, or somehow have the family meet with them. So the views of affairs for women and men was really very interesting for me, because it's always quite fascinating in some sense, even though we don't want to really admit it. But anyway, it is what it is. My Husband by Maud Ventura. This is her very first book. If you want to read a book that is very different in the sense of the theme, that is probably something that you've never read before, then I will highly recommend this. If you want it to be a teaser or a taster into some books, you know, some heavier books, and you want to read something light, then read this. I found this book very, very readable, and sometimes when you get a translated book into English, there's things that are missed in translation, and I would say that the translated copy for this didn't miss a beat. It got me interested. I was hooked into it straight away. I read this in the one sitting. There's a lot of white space, but like I said, there are a lot of different themes for me that stood out. The one particular quote that really stood out for me as well in this book, that I don't think I resonated with, but it would be very interesting if this resonates with you. She said there are 3 kinds of women. I read this in French, actually. This part, the quote in French with a different review, but it also stood out in English. And she said there are 3 kinds of women. The first kind is a mother, the second kind is a mistress, and the third kind is a woman in love. Now, I thought to myself, does that mean I'm a woman in love after so many years of marriage? I hope I am, but not to the obsessive love like this woman was. Anyway, thanks for listening and thanks for watching. Bye for now.